So I enjoy a good cup of coffee. I even enjoy a bad cup of coffee. I enjoy coffee. Um, Coffee is one of those many products that you may have heard. Um, it can be tough at times. There's a certain fungal disease called a rust that has been killing a lot of coffee plants in different parts of the world. And it's kind of big news within the industry as it spreads to a new region, to South America or Central America or Indonesia or East Africa, places where they grow a lot of coffee. And this is one of those things that climate change is probably playing a role in the spread of some of these diseases that are affecting things that we enjoy, that we get utility out of. So another example is avocados, monarch butterflies that winter in Mexico, bananas. All of these different products are being threatened. Some of them are products. Something like a butterfly isn't a product, but it's something people enjoy, right? Like we talked about in the last video. But all of those are things that are being threatened by changes, and those changes are most likely, more likely than not, linked to global climate change. So climate change is kind of the granddaddy of all environmental issues right now, in the sense that it's related to almost every other environmental topic, and it's related to almost every economic activity that we have going on in the world right now at some level. So, people who really care about climate change stuff, they do this carbon accounting where they try to factor in basically what are all of the different activities that I do or that I'm associated with, and how much carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gases are emitted because of that. And so you can look at vehicle miles traveled. How much do you drive? What type of vehicle is it? That gives you an idea of how much carbon dioxide is being emitted from the tailpipe of your vehicle. If you fly, how much carbon dioxide is emitted for your portion of that flight. And so we could do that with all of these things, which is one way of saying pretty much everything we do has some tie to climate change. That's why it's such a big issue, something that we all contribute to. It's also something that affects all of us in some way. And so some people are affected directly and pretty severely. If you live in a low-lying coastal area in certain countries, then coastal flooding has gotten worse over the last 30 years because of climate change. And so that paired with more severe tropical storms can lead to some really, really nasty stuff. I mean, we see tropical storms hit the Gulf states, Florida, and places here in the US, places like Bangladesh or the Seychelles or different South Pacific islands. They're really, I mean, it's almost an existential threat. Not quite yet, but in the next 50 or 100 years, they're looking at some really tough decisions to make about, if you're a relatively poor, low-lying area, if you're Miami, you can pay millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars to fortify, to try to, increase your infrastructure so that you can withstand a higher sea level and more frequent storms. If you're a poor area in Bangladesh, you don't have those resources to make that choice. So for you, it's deciding whether to stay and live with a lot of risk and perhaps unpleasantness, or to move, which is obviously a big deal for a lot of people. So climate change is a huge topic. It leads to lots of moral quandaries. And you could think of it at a country level, you could think of it at an individual level. Since it's a global phenomenon, all of those levels matter. They're all applicable, right? And so you could think of some of the kind of moral issues that come up. A country like the United States emits a lot of carbon dioxide per person. We have a high standard of living. We travel quite a bit. We eat a lot of beef, which has a pretty high carbon footprint. So we, as a country, release a lot of carbon dioxide and contribute to climate change in a big way. China has the highest level of carbon emissions per capita. They're a lot lower than us, right? So they release more carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases than the US or any other country, but they also have a billion people, where we have a third that. So we're a carbon intense economy. We enjoy a high standard of living. We feel some effects from climate change. We see that with tropical storms. We see that with sea level rise in the Chesapeake Bay. We see that with more frequent droughts and wildfires. We see that with water variability issues out west. We see it with lots of things, and we expect to see it more going forward. But again, we're probably not feeling it. We're definitely not feeling it as bad as some people are. And so, you want to come talk to me, Gid? Oh, my son almost came as a helper for a few minutes, but it's not a very fun topic to talk about, perhaps. A little bit morbid almost. So places in the Arctic are actually the ones who are feeling climate change the most. They've seen the most temperature increase, and they see the most substantial changes around them, with substantial reductions in ice pack, in glaciers melting, in permafrost thawing. So there are communities in, say, Alaska that are not stable because the ground that they're on is no longer frozen hard the way it historically has been. So they're having to either completely rebuild things or move. I mentioned low-lying areas in places like Bangladesh. I mean, these places are really feeling climate change already, and again, we expect that even more going forward. So what responsibility do we, as Americans who emit a lot of carbon dioxide and contribute a lot to this phenomenon, what do we owe them when historically, these relatively poor people in Bangladesh, they haven't contributed much to the stock of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? They're living at a pretty low standard of living previously and even into the present. So how does that work? We're the ones who kind of caused this problem, not just us, but again, we play kind of an outsized role if we're looking at a per person level. These people haven't contributed to it much in a meaningful way, but they feel the biggest effects and they have fewer resources to deal with it. So it certainly feels like there's this moral imperative to do something. But what that something should be is really tricky and contentious. And climate change is so contentious, not because of the science showing that it's there, that these things are happening. I mean, almost all scientists agree on that point. Climate change is so controversial because of, okay, so then what, right? Because of these moral issues, that's why climate change is such a controversial topic, why if you're watching Fox News versus MSNBC, they'll talk about climate change in totally different terms, right? It's not because the science underlying either of those sides is different. It's because they really look at that and see the what's next as being radically different. And so, that's where we are in a moral issues of capitalism class. What's next? What role do markets play in contributing, mitigating, adapting when it comes to climate change? What role do individuals, what role do governments? All of these things, with a complicated issue like this, they're all going to have roles to play, but what those roles will be look very different based on, again, not the non-moral science backing it, that's pretty much stable, but the moral arguments that you have about what role you want to see government play, what role you want to see international organizations play, how you feel about transfers, about one country giving money to another country, or maybe at an individual level, one person giving some of their wealth to someone else. That's where we see such strong disagreement. And one of the readings for this week is an excerpt, a few pages from the policymaker summary of the IPCC special report. So this is the Intergovernmental Panel on the Convention for Climate Change. A UN-created body that studies climate change comes out with these periodic reports about kind of the state of things with climate change, what we expect to see in the future, what we're currently seeing, and they periodically make these special reports. This one's looking at a 1.5 degree Celsius increase over a baseline temperature and kind of what that means, and comparing it to some other possible scenarios. So with that, I want you to skim over that excerpt I posted to get a sense of what this panel, which is a consensus-based organization. So this is basically a bunch of scientists and social scientists and such coming together, and they all agree on this stuff that's in this report. And so what do they see as things that are very high-risk threats now versus in the future? And think about some of the moral issues that come up at an individual level, at an international level, because there are a lot of them. And again, this is a topic that we could easily teach a course on the moral issues that come up with climate change as related to capitalism and market systems. But we're obviously going to skim over the top much more than that. So I'll leave it at that with this video, and we'll talk a little bit more.